Hey everybody, Caleb here, and today we're going to do how to make a cheap guitar play better again. This is another guitar I have. It's on the more affordable side. I really don't know exactly what this is. This was given to me. It has no label on the headstock. On the back, all it says is made in Korea. On the inside, it has a number that says W020985. If I were to guess, that would mean that it was made in 85. That's a total guess. I have no idea. I have seen one other guitar like this that used to be listed on Reverb, and he didn't really know what it was either. So, if you know anything about this, you could let me know, and I would be appreciative. I say it's a cheaper guitar because there are a couple of things about this that were definitely done on the cheaper side. You can see it's got big block inlay, and some of them are crooked. They're not totally square to the frets. Beyond that, there's a couple of things I'll show as we go throughout that make me think this is definitely a cheaper instrument. I am fairly certain the top is solid wood, but the back and sides are plywood. It sounds really good. I really enjoy the sound of this guitar. But there's a few playability things that this needs to get it up in good playing condition. Now, since we've already done how to make a cheap guitar play better, I'm going to try not to recover anything. I'm going to try to go over stuff that I didn't cover in the first video. So I've got a list made up, and hopefully that'll help me keep on track. We'll sit her down here, point the camera down, and we'll get to it. So I've got this set down here, and I thought we'd go through what to check first, and I'll try to do this in an order that makes the most sense. First things first, we're up to pitch. I checked that right before I turned the camera on. Because a lot of these measurements change as the strings pull differently, you really want to check your measurements at the string tension you're going to have these be at. So now that I know everything's where it should be, I'm going to start checking a couple of things we're going to check. So I'm going to check the 12th fret. I think that's a fine place to start. We'll check the action. We're sitting at about 85, 90 thousandths of an inch. Now everybody always asks, what's this tool? This is the Insize number 4630-1E. This is a taper gauge. It measures in thousandths of an inch. It's a really quick way to check your outside strings. Like I said, I think it's that bass E is measuring about 85, which is really, really close to perfect. I mean, you probably couldn't ask for a whole lot more. Treble string. It's actually a hair higher. It's sitting closer to 95. So I could actually lower that treble side down a little bit. I'll write those numbers down so I remember them. So the next thing we're going to do is check the relief on the neck. And the easiest way to do that is with one of these notched straight edges. Now, if you're really good at this, you can sight the neck and see if you've got any underbow, which I'm calling relief because this is a mostly flat neck. I've already looked at it. It's looking pretty good. I'll try and show you a little bit here. So I set this on here, and if I use the right side, the notches go between the frets, or moreover, the notches are notched out for the frets. And then I can look along that bottom edge, and I can see how flat that neck is. So that's looking pretty good for me. That's just about where I like them. So I'm not going to touch that. I'll just leave it alone, leave it as it is. This is one of those things that it can vary from person to person. Some people like a little bit more. Typically, if you're hitting a string a little harder, you might want a little more relief in there to give the strings a little more room to vibrate. But, for the most part, there's about a standard, and that's about what we go with. So we're looking at the nut now, and the way I check the height at the nut, and that is the string height at the nut, is based off of the first fret. What I'll do is get out this pick, and I'm basically using this pick as a feeler gauge. I know how thick this is. This is about 17 and a half thousandths thick. That's about the height I like my strings to be off of the first fret. So I'll slide that in there, and I can kind of feel the resistance on that bass string, so I know it's sitting pretty good. Now, when we get to that A string, you'll notice it doesn't make contact at all. So that A string is sitting just a little high. That D string is too. As we slide this across, G is sitting a little high. B is sitting a little high. And E is sitting a little high. So really the bass string is good. The rest of them could come down just a little bit. And I think I'm going to go ahead and take care of that first, because that will get our action. That's going to affect the action a little bit. You know, we're not going to be moving it a whole bunch, but that's going to change where the height is at the 12. So just like how I said, you know, you want to take these measurements with the strings at full tension, I'm going to fix the nut while the strings are at full tension, except for the one I'm working on. That way the neck is still strained in the same position it was. So I'll loosen the high E string enough so I can get it out of the nut. Take it to the side, and then I'll get a file to take this down just a hair. So now I would get my file out here, and I have this set of gauged files from StewMac, and this is what I would use to start working this down. Now, in the last video, there were a couple of comments asking about cheaper tools, and I have also used this set. These are files meant for string grooves. The problem I have is these don't work very good. This came in a set of 3. And I'm sure they were way, way cheaper than the StewMac files. They're double-sided. So this is the first string and the 4th string. This is string 2 and 5. This is string 3 and 6. And they don't work anywhere near as well as the StewMac files. On top of that, I have no idea how thick these are. Whereas the StewMac files tell you exactly how thick they are right on it. I know these are so much more expensive, but they do work a lot better. If somebody knows of a cheaper alternative, I would appreciate a comment from there, and I will start talking about those. These are expensive, but they do the job better than this sort of thing does. So this is a job you can go overboard really quickly on. So we're going to try not to do that. So I take a little off. Make sure to keep my angle, because you don't want that slot to be flat. You're going to get buzzing in the nut. You want some angle in that slot to point towards the tuner, so that the last point of contact is this edge. That helps your intonation, and it means you won't get any buzzing. So I took a little bit off of there, and I'll tune this back up, and we'll check the height again. So we're up to pitch, and I'll slide my pick back in there. So you see that? How it makes noise when I hit it? It mutes that string, which means it's coming in contact. That's good. I like that. That's a good string height for that. So I'll move on to the B. Now that I've shown this, I'll go ahead and take care of the rest of these off camera. This can be a really fiddly process. So I'll go ahead and get her done, and we'll move on. So now that we've got the nut in adjusted, I am going to recheck the height down at the 12. And since I was just talking about cheaper tools, there are cheaper options than this wedge. Usually the options are feeler gauges that you can stack and stick in there and get the right height that way. There's also a kind of a measurement that they stick on the side, wherein you have something that goes along the side and you can see how tall it is. That's another option, and both of those are a lot cheaper than this, I'm sure, but considering how often I do this and the amount of time it saves me from having to stack feeler gauges or get down and look, I can just shove it in there. And the second it runs up against it, I know where it's at. And the action has not changed a whole lot because that nut was not super far off. I'd say it's changed less than 5 thousandths, and for action that's negligible, 5 thousandths. That's crazy thin, thickness of a hair almost. So we're good for that. What I want to do now is adjust the action height at the saddle, which I think I can do fairly easily, seeing as this has an adjustable bridge. On the last cheap guitar I did, you saw how I moved the saddle down, you know, by marking it with the Sharpie and taking it to the sander. Now this one should be easier. These adjustable bridges are kind of a curse and a blessing. They're a lot easier to adjust, but they run into a lot of problems longevity-wise. If this were a higher-end instrument, I wouldn't be opposed to getting rid of this adjustable bridge and putting in a non-adjustable one. Typically, the non-adjustable ones sound a little better and have quite a few less problems in the long run, but because this is cheaper, I'm going to leave it as it is. I believe all I need to do here is turn this and hope that it's not all the way down. So we'll recheck the tuning now. And like with all adjustments, I go really small increments. I don't want to overshoot something and have trouble making it back up. So I believe that took us down a hair. We'll check the action on this side. And it did. It took us down to about 80 thousandths on the treble side. We're sitting at about 80 thousandths on the bass side. That's thousandths of an inch. I think I'm happy with that. So for me, the action right now is set perfect. So now that we've got the action sitting pretty much where we want it, I think it's time we check the intonation. And I talked about this in the last video I put out, but you know, I've tried to be focusing on how to make a guitar play better, not so much how to make a cheap guitar sound better. And if you ask me, intonation really is making a guitar sound better, but it's such a black and white thing. I think we're going to focus on it a little bit here today. And, you know, a lot of these guitars need a little help with that. So I'm going to work on it a little bit here. First thing we need to do is make sure we're up to tune. So we're sitting at tune, and now what we'll do is we'll check and see where it's at the 12th fret. So basically I'm checking to see how in tune it is up through the fretboard. And the 12th fret would be the octave, so we'll check it at that. You can see there, that low E is spot on. So we'll move on to the A. I'd say that A is just a hair sharp. Now I'm going to write these down over to the side so I can remember. Then we'll do the D. That D's really not wanting to stay right on the note, but I know that it floats a little flat. So long as it's the same at the 12, I'm going to say that D floats just even less sharp than the A does, just because it's not sitting at the same spot on the at the 12th fret. See, open, it works just a hair flat. You know, it goes a little flat to maybe right on, but when I get up to the 12, it goes maybe a little sharp. So it works from the other way, so I'd say that's a little sharp. At G is spot on. And B is definitely sharp. That E is spot on. So I've got 3 strings that are a little sharp. And I would prefer that they come up sharp than flat, because sharp is easier to fix on a saddle like this. This saddle, all these strings leave on the front edge. And when they're sharp, to fix that, I need to push the point they leave backwards. When it's sharp, the string is too short, so we need to add a little length to it. That's easy to do when the saddle leaves at the front edge. Now, if it left right in the middle, you may not have enough room to adjust it. So, I think the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and take all the strings off of here. I'm going to do some fine adjustments on here, what I think looks about good, then I'll come back through and do final touch-ups if I have to. But there's some things I want to do while the strings are all the way off of here, so I'm going to go ahead and take all of them off. Then I will do what I think looks good, and then we'll come back and do the fine adjustment once I'm done with the strings off of here. So I'll go ahead and get these strings off of here, and then we'll move on. So I got the strings off here, and I just pulled this saddle out of here. If this were a more expensive instrument, I would probably replace this plastic saddle with a bone one. But since this is going back into this metal thing, I'm really not worried about it. That would be a good way to make your guitar sound better. But for this, my plastic will do just fine. We're just going to compensate it a little. So I hope you can see this saddle here. I've got a file out, and I'm going to file back the points in which I was coming up sharp. So the A and the D were coming up a little bit sharp, the A a little bit more than the D. So I'm going to take the front off of the saddle. So now that means the last point of contact for the string is further back in on the saddle. That looks pretty good for that. And then that B string was pretty sharp, so I'll take it back a little bit more. Now this might be easier to do in a vise, but I'm trying to keep it where maybe you can see kind of what I'm doing. And then I'm going to try to keep from getting any sharp corners. And that's feeling pretty good. Just real lightly touch that. Knock off any sharp parts. And that's compensated to a degree. Now I may have to do a little bit more on here once we check it again. But for now, that's going to be good. Now we'll do the other things I need to do while the strings are off. So at the very beginning, I said there were a few things that made me think this was done a little bit cheaper. And I had mentioned that the inlay weren't straight. You can probably really see it on this inlay in particular. Along with not being straight, it is very, very unstuck. So I'm pretty sure my best plan of action here is to pull this all the way out, make sure it's clean, and then glue it back in. Oh, I think I found some more evidence to the fact that this was done a little bit more on the cheap. This inlay is wedge shaped. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if it were thinner in both sides compared to the middle because of the radius shape, and when you're sanding that down, you're going to take more off the edges. But no, this goes from a thick side all the way to one side that's much thinner. I'll see if you can see that. If you can see that wedge there, yeah, it's very much wedge shaped. And you can feel it in the slot. This side is much deeper than this side. I can tell you exactly how much. So the base side of the slot is 66 thousandths of an inch deep. The treble side of the slot is 32 thousandths of an inch deep, almost half. Yeah, that seems about right. It looks really smooth in there. I'm kind of hesitant to just put glue in there. I don't think it's going to stick. So I'm going to need to do something to kind of rough that up. I'm just curious. I can't tell what it is, but it looks glass smooth in there. And I really don't think any glue is going to be sticking to that. So I'm just kind of scraping it. Trying to scuff it up. That'll probably do. So because I've got it all the way open, and I'm more worried about the big mess it's going to make, I'm going to use the canopy glue. I could use CA glue, and that would probably be a fine choice. I'm just worried about pressing that inlay in there and then having CA glue run all over this space and down the neck. That's not really what I want. So I'm going to use some of this. And this is water cleanup, so much nicer option. Just pressing it in there. I'm going to go ahead and stick a clamp on this and let it sit for a little while. I think it's just going to help it in the long run. So that should hold that in there, get nice and set up. This doesn't take too long to dry, so we'll let that sit up, clean it up a little bit, and then we can move on from there. So while this is got its strings off of it, I thought I might go ahead and go through and clean up the tuners and maybe oil them up a little bit. I've got to take the screws out to get the cover off, so I went ahead and just did this one. I'll probably go through and do them one by one. This is a toothbrush with some denatured alcohol on it. I just thought that might cut some grease and dirt and dry up pretty quick. So just clean them up. And then I'm going to put a dot of oil on there to keep them turning good. Make sure there's no excess. Then we'll put this back together. On these older guitars, these tuners can get really grimy, sticky, a little hard to turn. If it's crazy hard to turn, that usually means you have more problem than just it's dirty. But if you keep up on the maintenance, and that's not real difficult to do, they'll stay working really well. And if they turn easy, then they stay in tune better. So we've done quite a bit of good for this guitar already. We got the nut height set, so the strings are coming good off the nut. We've done a little bit of tuner maintenance to make sure they're turning smoothly. We've got the saddle height set, so we should be good action-wise. We've started on the intonation. We'll have to check that once we get the strings back on it. I focused on it a lot in the last video where I was rounding the fret ends and making sure this felt really good. So I went ahead and did all the fretwork off camera, since there's a million other videos that I've done you can go see it in. And it's looking really good and it's feeling really good. We've got the frets all polished up and ready to go. I'm almost ready to start stringing this back up. The one thing I'm going to do now is put the angle on the ends of these pins. So you can see I've got a file out, and what I'm going to do is basically just run this across here. You could do this with sandpaper, or you could do this on the sanding wheel or on the belt sander even. But it doesn't take too much to work an angle into there, and that helps the ball end from getting stuck on the end here as you push it in the hole, which does happen quite a bit. This way it forces that ball end to slide off and against the bridge plate where it should be. That one is looking good, so I'll move on to the next one. Doesn't take real long, and this saves you a lot of headache, because you'll be tuning a guitar up and then that ball end will be stuck on the end, and then you get to that certain point and it just pushes the pin all the way out. And then you basically got to start over with that string. So this way the ball end is held right where it should be with no issue. The last set of pins I bought, which were D'Addario pins, actually came with the angle already on them. So I think they're starting to catch on and realize this is a good idea. And we've talked about cheaper tools throughout this video. And like I said, you don't have to use a file, but if you have one, this works. You know, some sandpaper would work. Even some coarser sandpaper, you know, 150 to anything in the 200-300 range. But all of that would work really, really well to just knock this angle on there. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time, and it will save you a lot of headache. That's really the idea of this video and the last one, is just a couple of tips that might save you some headache. Make your guitar play a little better. Alright, that was number 6. Let's string this thing up. So I've decided to not replace these strings on this today. They're not too bad or too worn, so I figure I'm just going to keep with them. But I did get the question in the last video, or the suggestion to talk about string gauge. So I thought I'd touch on it very quickly here. Most of the time I use what they would call lights for acoustics, which is... It ends on the 12 gauge. The high E string is a 12 gauge string. It is what I prefer, but string gauge can affect how your guitar plays. You know, and that might be something to consider if you're looking for a guitar that's easier to play. Obviously, lighter gauge strings will play a little easier because you can push them a little easier. As well, if you have a really cheap guitar, I wouldn't go put heavy strings on it because they're just not built to the same strength that a higher end guitar is, and they may not be able to hold heavier strings. So now that I've said these two things, you might go, well, why would anybody use heavier strings? When it comes to acoustic guitars, heavier strings tend to just be louder. They project a little better. They're louder. As well, they're not quite as floppy as lighter strings, which really means you can hit it a little harder and the string won't move near as much, so it can be louder again. It's all about what you really like. If you're going to change string gauge, there's like 100 things you have to check to make sure that it's good for that. It affects the tension, so you're going to have to check the straightness of your neck. If you're going to a lighter tension, you may have to loosen your truss rod because the strings no longer pull like they used to. If you're going up, you may have to tighten your truss rod because the strings are now pulling with that much more tension. String gauge can affect your intonation as well. And a lot of string gauge is whatever you get comfortable with. For most acoustic guitars, I would stick with the 12s, the lights. If you have a nice high-end guitar that you know can handle mediums, that would be a little different. But I would stick with 12s or lighter. Now, when you get into guitars that are really old, more sentimental pieces, you might go lighter, and that would be better. Also, if you were learning to play, a lighter set might be the way to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing tuned up, and then we'll take one more good look at that intonation and see where we're at. So I got this tuned back up, and you know, I had 3 strings that were out, so we'll check those 3, and the others were doing pretty good, so I shouldn't have to worry about them. Make sure it's in tune. Spot on. Spot on. And spot on. So, I don't know if you can see that. Maybe my arm was in the way. But all 3 of those strings that were out are perfect. So this thing is intonated great now. It should sound better than it did. You know, I've done quite a bit here to make this play better, and you know, all of it was a bunch of little things on this. Just little things that'll help avoid problems in the future, like making sure the tuners stay clean and well oiled. That's making sure that they're going to work well. That is a huge part of making these play well that most people don't think about. I could not tell you how many times I have picked up a guitar and started tuning it and them just be smooth. And that is when you realize how bad other tuners are, because you sit there and they turn and they just turn and they just tune. And you go, man, it is so nice to have tuners that just work. So it's good to keep those in good playing order. You know, we intonated the saddle, which it's great. It's better than it's ever been. We got these the bevel on these pins done, which will help in the long run when it's time to change strings. And even now, I didn't have any issue with those ball ends getting stuck. That's a big improvement and a very little thing. I think we've covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover on this guitar. I am sure that there will be more how to make a cheap guitar play better videos. I know that I've got a long list of stuff for electrics that I'm going to start looking at. If you'd like me to cover something, please leave it in the comments. For now, I think we're ready to go play this thing. Well, I think we got this thing in really good playing condition. You know, getting everything set at the right height, that's a huge improvement. And then getting that intonation really cleans up the sound. As well, tuning this up works so much better now with these oiled and clean tuners. You know, you turn them and they don't stick and you don't have to pry and turn as hard as you can. They just turn. That's what sets guitars apart a lot, is how easy they are to just turn them. I'm getting distracted playing it because I didn't really enjoy playing it. It plays really well. The action is really low. It almost plays as good as any electric guitar. So I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope you picked up a couple of maybe some good tips. I'm sure that there's going to be another how to make a cheap guitar play better. I got tons of good suggestions on electric guitars, so that should be coming up. Besides that, thanks for watching, and I will see you later.